geographical.
And English is the language.
English is the language.
Okay.
So, welcome everyone, dear journalists, dear guests, welcome to the press conference. We are very delighted to welcome here in Tallinn, in Estonia, at the Stenbock House, the Prime Ministers of Latvia and Lithuania. The Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, Krišjānis Kariņš and Ingrida Šimonytė have just concluded their trilateral meeting and will deliver short remarks. After that, it is possible for media to ask questions. The press conference is held in English with simultaneous translation into Estonian. First, Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, the floor is yours, please.
Dear Ingrida, dear Krišjānis, it's my great honor to welcome you here in Tallinn again, as we have the whole year of visiting Estonia, really, in this trilateral meetings that we have. Further strengthening our cooperation in the region is one of the priorities also with my new government. Today, we focused on one of the major challenges facing us, which is ensuring our energy security. This is a priority issue. Synchronizing our power systems with the Central European systems successfully and effectively was among one of the first topics discussed in my new government. Ingrida, please accept my congratulations on your successful isolation test in April. As for the next steps, it is important for Estonia that this joint Baltic project, which was started considering the strategic interests of all three countries, continues in the same spirit of cooperation and unity. This is why Estonia supports accelerating synchronization. Technical studies, especially on production capacity and energy prices, will allow us to clarify the details and exact timing of this process. We are waiting for the studies with great interest. The key is to work together to ensure the security of supply and minimize the risks for the consumers. Today we agreed to continue discussions on accelerating as soon as all of our technical studies are finished. In doing so, we will try to find a joint timeline for acceleration. Ministers responsible for energy will continue working on details, and we will continue coordinating closely with the European Commission and Poland. Dear colleagues, Ukraine's fight for freedom and our efforts to end the cycle of Russian aggression are far from over. The free world must be ready for a long-term effort. We must continue our joint efforts to ensure Ukraine's victory. European agreement to send 1 million rounds of artillery ammunition to Ukraine was an important milestone. For the initiative to deliver, all member states must do their share as soon as possible. The ammunition Estonia decided to send has already reached Ukraine. We must also move ahead with the use of Russian frozen assets for Ukraine's reconstruction. At the European Council meeting in June, decision on how we will go forward. We must make the aggressor pay for everything it destroys. We must continue our efforts to help Ukraine to win not only its fight for freedom, but also its fight for justice. We have come a long way to make sure that there will be no impunity, no immunity for war criminals. Half a year ago, most were not ready to publicly support the idea of special tribunal for the crime of aggression. And now we are discussing it among leaders, and we are discussing its legal modalities. Just today, Estonia is hosting a meeting of the core group made up over 30 countries dedicated to establishing this special tribunal. Earlier this week, Europe celebrated European Day, and for the first time, Ukraine also celebrated this day as Europe Day. We hope Ukraine can launch accession negotiations with the EU this year. The requirements need to be fulfilled 100%, and Ukraine has already made a lot of progress in reforms during wartime. As Ursula von der Leyen clearly expressed in Kiev, The implementation of the 7 steps should lead the opening of negotiation. Today, we also focused on preparations for the NATO summit in Vilnius. Living next to a pariah state, we all understand very well that the only way to a lasting peace is ending the grey zones in Europe. Our region is a living example of it. This is why, for peace in Europe, we also need the Ukraine in the European Union, we need the Ukraine in NATO. And we need the positive message for Ukraine from Vilnius summit this July. From Vilnius, we also expect decisions that put forward defense into practice on NATO's eastern flank. First and foremost, NATO's new regional defense plans must be in place and backed up by necessary forces and capabilities. To strengthen its deterrence and defense posture long-term, NATO needs investments. This is why support setting 2% of our GDP as an immediate commitment to all allies and a long-term goal of 2.5% to be reached by 2030. Estonia is doing its share, raising defense spending to 3% of our GDP, working to improve our defense readiness and increasing the size of Estonian armed forces. So thank you again for being in Tallinn, and I look forward to continuing our conversation also at the Lennart Meri conference this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Prime Minister Karinš, please.
Thank you very much, Kaia, Ingrida. As always, it's a pleasure when the three of us can meet, even more so that today in Tallinn, I think we're moving from spring rapidly into summer, which I think lifts everyone's spirits. The 3 Baltic countries, we need each other. We need each other politically, we need each other economically, we need each other militarily. And what is very promising is that our unity and the way that through discussions we address issues and find common cause and common language is the way forward. We've been doing this for years, and today's meeting is yet another affirmation that this is the way forward, and it is in the best interests of all the citizens in all 3 Baltic countries. Kaia, you already mentioned, of course, the main topics that we discussed, so the first of these is energy. I'm convinced that when we look as the Baltic countries at our long-term energy objective, this is to go fully renewable, that is to be completely independent of fossil fuels, thereby making sure that in the future we would never again be dependent on single source providers, be it Russia or someone else. What we can produce at home means that we don't have to import from elsewhere, and this is the direction where all 3 of us are heading. Very important to move forward. And one of the big potentials that we have in all 3 Baltic countries is wind energy, specifically offshore wind energy. And for these projects to become viable, we also need infrastructure that links the 3 Baltic countries more to Central Europe, also more to Scandinavia, to make sure that the investments come and the energy flows can move freely and to keep prices in the Baltics down. This is also a goal. Of course, part of that is synchronizing with the Central European grid. It's also a very high priority for Latvia. We discussed this today, and we're all in agreement that we need to move as quickly as is feasible on a technical level, but certainly the political will and the determination is there amongst all of us. I also want to note that it's very positive that Lithuania had this test and that the test was very successful. This is a good omen, and it shows that our goal of synchronizing with Europe is attainable and is closer than we thought at first. Regarding Ukraine, in the Baltics, we understand very well that the security of Europe rests or starts with the security of Ukraine. How events unfold there will mean what the security situation in Europe will be. And right now, in Russia's thinking, Ukraine has been a gray zone, a country that they can attack and that they did not expect resistance either from the Ukrainians or from the Europeans or the NATO countries. Of course, they encountered the exact opposite. Fierce and determined Ukrainian resistance that I'm positive historians will be writing about for many years to come, but also a united Europe and a united NATO in terms of supporting Ukraine. The three of us as Baltic countries, we are in the vanguard of providing the support. So if we look at percentage of GDP, all of us have given the systems and equipment that we have very early on, even before the February 24th attacks, and we continue through this day in leading the call for other European and NATO member states to match our commitment relative to the size of our economies. And we will continue this, continuing to argue for a unified and determined support for Ukraine until its final victory over the Russian aggression. Of course, part of this, and for Ukraine, it's very important that there's a twofold track, a clear track to joining the European Union, of course, adhering to all of the requirements that any European member state has to adhere to, as the three of us did when we were in the process of joining, and also, of course, a clear path to joining NATO, because only when the war is over and Ukraine is in NATO will we have true peace and security in Europe, because we will have removed, as Kaya mentioned, the gray areas, the one big, from Russia's point of view, gray area that still is in Europe. And looking towards the NATO summit in Vilnius, which is coming up in the beginning of July, it's a number of things. It's very important that NATO continues to evolve and implement its commitment to the forward defense in the eastern flank of NATO, especially in the three Baltic countries, that we move towards getting combat-ready brigades in each of our countries, working closely with our NATO host or NATO lead members, so the Brits here in Estonia, the Germans in Lithuania, and the Canadians in Latvia. So we continue strong cooperation with our main partners. But also in Latvia, we are doing our part. We are at about 2.5% of GDP on defense, and I'm convinced that in the upcoming budgets, we will be budgeting more, moving up towards 3%. The decision has not yet been made, but it's to me clear as day that we are heading absolutely in this direction. We are reintroducing conscription this year. The first call-up will be in July and then in January, with the aim of creating combat-ready and what's very important, fully equipped reserve forces of an ever greater size. We are in the process of acquiring new weapon systems, which includes the HIMARS missile system, the coastal defense systems, and the air defense systems. But what we need from NATO is a clear commitment to help the Baltics bridge this gap from where we are today, that we don't yet have all these systems, until we get there, that NATO has a firm commitment, especially also to air and missile defense in our region. And of course, a clear indication for Ukraine that NATO is the future. We will continue to work together, the three of us, and I once again want to thank you, Kaya, for hosting an excellent meeting.
Thank you. Prime Minister Shimonita, please.
Thank you, dear Kaya, for convening us here today. And as always, it's a great pleasure to discuss the most pending issues with you and Christianis. And no surprise, during today's meeting, we have addressed security situation in the region, as you usually do, and support for Ukraine, as we usually do recently, sanctions against Russia and Belarus, as well as upcoming NATO summit in Vilnius. And we have also emphasized and importance of cooperation among the Baltic states in the field of energy security. We are very well, too well, aware that Russia, blinded by its imperial ambitions, poses a threat not only to freedom of Ukraine, but also to our own nations, to Europe as a whole, to democratic values, and to rules-based world order. Today, EU citizens live in peace, thanks to courage of Ukrainian people who have prevented, so far, the aggression from spreading further. The least we can do is to help Ukraine in any way possible, and do it promptly. Providing Ukraine with essential armaments, including long-range missiles and fighter jets, is crucial. When defending freedom, we cannot think of taboos on military support. We must help Ukraine to win the war. This is the only path to sustainable peace and the prevention of another war in Europe. We must continue the work we have started and not succumb to war fatigue. We must continue to work together, mobilizing the widest possible support from the international community to Ukraine, and to Ukraine's efforts to ensure accountability for Russia and its political and military leadership, including for the crime of aggression through the establishment of special tribunal that Kaya already mentioned. Together with the colleagues, we have discussed the need to pursue a uniform and proper implementation of sanctions. We must make every effort to minimize the circumvention of sanctions. And here the regional approach is very important. We shall be ready for the fact that Russia is preparing for a prolonged confrontation with NATO. We have also addressed our joint efforts to make the upcoming NATO summit in Vilnius a success, both in terms of decision relating to deterrence and forward defense, Ukraine's application for Euro-Atlantic integration and NATO membership, and in terms of strengthening NATO capabilities. Furthermore, we have also discussed the other very important common objective for Baltic countries, the synchronization of electricity systems with continental Europe. Given the current geopolitical context, accelerated desynchronization, in other words, moving away from dependence from Russia and Belarus in terms of electricity grids, is key for our security and energy independence. We have direct experience, unfortunately, of how Russia weaponizes energy. Also, this winter, we witnessed Russia's systematic attempts to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure, so we cannot ignore even the slightest possibility that Russia could also exploit our dependence on its electricity networks at the most critical moment. As it was mentioned, Lithuania has recently successfully carried out isolated operational tests of our electricity system. And I think that it is our strategic priority. As was mentioned by my colleagues, it is our strategic priority, it remains our strategic priority, the earliest possible synchronization with European grid of all Baltic states together. Once again, I express my sincere gratitude to my colleagues for this meeting and looking forward for the discussion during Leonard Mary conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Now it's possible for me to ask questions. Please state your name, to whom the question is addressed to, and what media house you're representing. And I believe we have first one already prepared. Yes, please, Herman.
Hello, Herman Gelames from ST Express. I have a question for all three of you about synchronization. I'm listening to your very careful words, and it seems to me that Estonia and Latvia feel like Lithuania is trying to rush it. So can you describe in detail what your key disagreement is?
We don't have a disagreement. We have an agreement. It's a Baltic project. Everybody of us wants to accelerate this, and we do everything that is possible to have the technical conditions ready to accelerate this. And that's why we are waiting for the studies, because it's not a political issue, it's a technical issue, whether it's doable and what we have to do. And after those studies, we can agree on a very specific timeline. But I think we are in agreement here.
Yes, I agree with what Kaja Kallas said. The goal is the same for all three of us, and the goal would be to move together. And now, when and how to do that is a technical issue, and this is in the process of being resolved. And as soon as the issues can be addressed, we are all three of us keen to move together on this.
Well, it is technical and political in a way that this is the only link that still exists in our energy system to the neighbors that we do not find to be reliable and committing to the agreements. So, as my colleagues already mentioned, we see the goal very similarly, as soon as possible. But as always with a complicated system like energy system, there are many devils in the details. So those devils should be explained by the studies that we are still waiting for. We cannot eliminate all the risks altogether. This I must stress, because when we started the isolated test, of course we were taking on some risks. But nevertheless, we had to do it because we had to know whether the system can function. So we performed the test and it was successful, but nevertheless, we were taking on the risk that something might not go in line with the plan. Luckily, that did not happen, and it was professionally managed, and we have the outcome, and this outcome is good for all of us to know. So we cannot eliminate all the risks that can materialize theoretically, but of course we must limit all the risks we know. And this is why our Ministers of Energy will cooperate very closely during the following months on the marking the very clear path how we can respond to the findings that will be made by studies, because this I cannot say. What will be made, what will be found by the studies that we are still expecting for. And then the political goal, as my colleagues mentioned, is a very clear one. Nobody wants to stay longer in this network than technically needed.
Thank you. Please.
Hello, I'm Jens Knowledge of Latvian public broadcaster, Latvian television on TV. Since energy is the main issue of this meeting, among the main issues, and Latvian Prime Minister mentioned we're moving from the spring into summer and we have winter behind us, which was luckily relatively mild for our energy systems. About the next winter, there have been warnings that it might be harder to deal with than this one. We don't know how it's going to go energy-wise. Do you feel concerned about the next winter? Are you preparing any more preparations needed to prepare for next winter? Thank you. For all three Prime Ministers.
Yes, thank you. We, of course, are making our arrangements to go to the next winter as well. We have been in Estonia accelerating the process of planning different energy projects so that we could have the security. We have also purchased gas to the gas storage in Latvia, and we are making the investments to our energy system to function properly. But we have to do this together, and together with our Nordic colleagues and Nordic partners as well, because we are in Nord Pool all together, and we try to minimize the risks as much as is possible. We have signed or agreed a memorandum of understanding regarding the LNG together with Latvia, so that we are using together the Inčukalns storage, as well as preparing for emergency case scenarios if needed. So we are preparing for the next winter.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, of course, we're preparing for the next winter. The good news in Latvia is that the gas supplies that the government bought in anticipation of last season are still underground. We did not have to use them. So the difference between this or the upcoming season and last season is we already have state reserves in Inčukalns as we speak today. In addition, thankfully to the falling energy prices around the world and in Europe on gas, that the gas that is now being moved into Inčukalns from various traders is at a much, much lower cost than it was last year, and all indications are that the supply will not be an issue. It will not be a concern, because we've already addressed the main supply concerns of existing on the gas system. We also have, as Kaja Kallas mentioned, between Latvia and Estonia, we have signed a memorandum of understanding which opens the pathway to ensuring we have the right algorithms for worst case scenarios, where the cooperation between our two countries would be clearly laid out regarding, one, the underground storage facilities at Inčukalns for gas, and the second, the Paldiski gas terminal, which could be utilized as well, bringing a third LNG input into the Baltics, the first being in Lithuania, the second now being in Finland, and the third potentially being used, which is already existent. The port facility is existent in Paldiski here in Estonia. And we're also moving as rapidly as we can push from the political side the conditions for more rapid investment, especially into wind energy. And there also, we have a joint project offshore with Estonia, the Elwin project, which is moving forward. There's been a memorandum of understanding between the three Baltic countries and one of the German grid operators, Hertz 50, and to open the door towards looking at and ultimately building infrastructure connecting the three Baltic countries to Germany, which would be opening the door for investments in offshore wind in all three of our territorial waters. So we look short term, we look medium and long term, and the name of the game is to work closely with one another.
In order not to repeat what my colleagues already said, I think we were prepared for the last winter, so now we are even better prepared. And if I might recall the last autumn, where there were many doomsday scenarios for Europe and for the countries that were dependent on Russian gas, it did not materialize. Of course, that came at a cost, but still, after the season, we know that the level of storage is much higher than it ever were during the same period on a European level, and the prices have collapsed since the peaks of August 2022. Now, there are many analysts who would say, now look for the next winter, because one might have a need to have a debate about some bad developments that might happen. But I think during this winter and last autumn, there were so many preparations made by so many countries, so many decisions taken that maybe a year or 5 years ago were unimaginable, that countries can develop terminals at a speed they did that in 22 and continuing to do so. So I think that we are pretty much better prepared for the next winter. There might be fluctuations of price, certainly, because there is lots of speculation whether there will be Asian demand or not, how much supply will go which route. But I think we should remain calm, because in a technical sense, with LNG terminal, with infrastructure in place, with the pipelines in place, we can ensure that our households and our companies do not get short of electricity and gas. And yeah, prices were a big problem. Recently, countries had to put big budgets for supporting companies and individuals, but at the same time, big support has been provided to companies and individuals to invest into renewables, into energy efficiency, RRF funds, European funds, lots of money, and it's still in the process. So I think we're much stronger and much safer than we were a couple of years ago.
Thank you. Now we have perhaps final question already. Yeah, wait, please.
Hi, Ott Tamek with Bloomberg News. Was wondering about the desynchronization plans. Is there a clear timetable for when the studies will be completed by? And also on the LNG potential cooperation. I mean, under what circumstances would you need, given that we have so much new capacity in the region, would you need the Paldiski terminal? And how would funding work between Estonia and Latvia? Questions are for the Estonian and Latvian Prime Minister. Thanks.
Thank you. First, for the studies, we were expecting the studies for the May now, but they're not ready due to some researchers outside of our 3 countries doing their additional work. So that's why right now we are expecting the studies to be ready in June. And then we can, on the energy ministers level, agree on a certain timetable, agree on the reading and diagnosis of the studies, and then move on with technical issues. So right now the agreed timeline is 26, but we try to accelerate, so it's anything before 26.
Yes, I can only add to that the studies, one of 3 is ready, but we need all 3, and we will move accordingly. And regarding the potential use of Paldiski and under what conditions, well, this is now what our energy ministers and the energy experts are in the process of ascertaining. The good news is that there's a political will to explore this path. And how that would be done and how costs would be allocated is a topic for discussion. But what's important for all consumers and companies in the Baltics to be aware of is that we have, prior to Putin's war in Ukraine, we had 1 LNG input in Klaipėda in Lithuania. Now we have 2 functioning LNG imports, so in Finland and in Lithuania, and we have a 3rd port effectively ready for a floating regasification ship to dock and offload materials. We are very well interconnected, the 3 of us, together with Finland and actually Poland for that matter, into the underground storage facility that Latvia has, which now has the ability to import gas at the same time as gas is being exported. So 2 years ago, it was a seasonal event. Now it's not a seasonal event. At any time gas can be imported, which is already happening today. So how and when and if this 3rd port would be used is under now negotiation, but certainly the potential means that our region, compared to just before the war, it's like day and night in terms of security of supply.
Thank you. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have. Prime Ministers are expected elsewhere and later in the Lennart Meri conference. Thank you everyone for coming and following online. Have a good day.